rapid options in his sideboard, which we will get to when that happens. But Kevin, with his setup turns, is going to start on a Temple of Epiphany. Ross has an Elvish Mystic, and it's this kind of fast start that I really want to see from Ross's deck.
Absolutely. Though this is why it's so important to be on the play. Kevin has no copies of, say, Magma Spray in his main deck. So when he's on the draw, a mana creature on turn 1 just gets to do its thing. So being on the play here and getting to Magma Jet it instead is incredible for him.
Yeah, Scry 2, I believe, keeps them on top of the deck. Not a great sign for Ross. And his growth is stunted a little bit here. He has Voyaging Satyr on turn 2, nothing else. And we'll see if Kevin can get that Mantis Rider. A turn 3 Mantis Rider on the play has got to be at the top of Kevin's list of plays he wants to make.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the... especially game 1 on the play, it seems like if he has anything else to follow it up, a turn 3 Mantis Rider should be good enough to take the match. And we've been hung up on that card so much, but even Goblin Rabblemaster would be an acceptable play here.
Yeah, Rabblemaster's good. Ross does have some interaction with Rabblemaster. He has cards like Courser of Krufix, even just Sylvan Carotids and Voyaging Satyrs to block away the Goblin tokens means he could keep one of those in check. But it's really the lack of reach and removal in his deck that makes Mantis Riders so scary. And it is Goblin Rabblemaster that Kevin has. Still a great 3-drop. Gonna make the token, Ross will block it. So right now, Ross gets to stay at 20.
It's funny, it's almost like we've forgotten about the Rabblemaster in the deck because we've been so hung up on the Mantis Rider. But this is part of the reason why. You know, Ross is very adept at clogging up the ground with random blockers. A lot of the cards you just alluded to. Idle of Blossoms is a nice play here to protect himself against a Rabblemaster.
Yeah.
But he's not that well equipped to fight in the air, and that's why Mantis Rider is a singularly significant threat.
So he plays Eidolon for the turn. This could trade with Rabblemaster if Kevin doesn't have a removal spell for it. And he's going to go to combat, make that Goblin token. They're going to attack, and it looks like he's going to go ahead and... They're actually not going to attack. He's going to convoke a Stoke the Flames at the Eidolon, and then Lightning Strike away the Voyaging Satyr. Kevin's using his removal here all on Ross's creatures as opposed to on Ross. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't necessarily mind it because, you know, Ross getting to do explosive things with his mana is really dangerous. And because, you know, because of the presence of Doomwake Giant in Ross's list, it's important for Kevin not to overvalue his one type of his creatures that much. But, you know, the fact that Ross was able to fire back with a Pelucranos here is really bad for Kevin.
I was surprised to see the Lightning Strike on the Voyaging Satyr. We see a swing of 2 tokens. Ross does now go down to 19. And then a Steam Augury from Kevin Jones.
So this is an element of Kevin's deck that I think harms him in the matchup. He has 2 copies of Steam Augury and 2 copies of Dig Through Time. And it feels like this matchup is a pure race. And the card drawers are not that helpful for fighting that kind of game.
Yeah, Steam Augury, as you see on the left here, this was a card that originally was hailed as a newer Fact or Fiction. I don't think over the last year it's lived up to that hype. It'll be interesting to see in new standard how much play this card gets. So if you played with Fact or Fiction, the idea is Kevin will split his cards into 2 piles, and then Ross chooses which cards Kevin gets to keep and which ones go in his graveyard. Usually that means when you cast this card, you end up getting 2 lands and your second best spell, or something close to that.
And here it is. You see the split of 2 lands and his second best spell versus the Mana Rider and the Magma Jet.
Yeah, I do have some expectation of this card getting better now that we have Delve in the set and things like of that nature.
It does synergize very nicely with Dig Through Time or Treasure Cruise, or, you know, if you want to be playing those kind of cards. It does work nicely with them.
So it's good with cards like Treasure Cruise. Of course, there's the concern of how many cards that just draw cards can you actually play in a deck.
Especially a burn deck where you know, you don't have a lot of power going on. Your opening hands of, you know, Lava Spikes and Divinations are probably not beating a lot of opponents.
Exactly. So he does get to keep in that hand Stoke the Flames and 2 lands, and he makes a land drop. But Ross has to be pretty thrilled that we're on turn 5 and he's at 19 life.
Oh, the pacing of this game so far is great. Now, Kevin can get this turned around pretty quickly with one of his threat cards, which is why I was a little surprised he didn't take the Mantis Rider. Unless his hand is really flush with burn, because Ross is at 19, and Kevin does not really have a repeated source of damage in play at this point.
Kevin doesn't get to decide which cards to keep. It's Ross that picks which pile Kevin gets. So Ross, I think, intentionally keeping him off the Mantis Rider. On Kevin's turn, he makes Seeker of the Way, but last turn was really rough for him. Pelucranos Monstrosity for 2, ate the Goblin Rabblemaster, and swung in. And now it's more heavy hitters that Ross is going to keep making. Doomwake Giant takes care of the Goblin token. Looks like Pelucranos will possibly swing for another 7.
And this has been the superstar of the tournament for Ross so far. He identified Doomwake Giant as a card that would be great against the various little creature decks he anticipated being popular in week 1. And he's been rewarded so far in this tournament.
And I mean, talking to Ross about it, he said he expected it to be good against cards like Elspeth and Mono Black aggro, and then it ended up being fantastic. He played a lot of Mardu tokens decks on the day, and he said, you know, this is just unfair to have a card like this in your main as a 4-of against those strategies.
And it's not like his deck is flush with answers to kill a Rabblemaster. You know, the opponent kind of has to cooperate to some extent and trade with something. So the board can definitely get built up a little bit. And then Doomwake Giant cleans it all up, which is nice too.
You see there, Kevin took the full hit from Pelucranos. He drops down to 6 here. And with Ross at a healthy 18 life, it looks like he's going to pull off the steal of game 1. Second Doomwake Giant is cast. If Kevin doesn't play a non-creature spell here, he's going to lose his Seeker of the Way.
And even if he does, all that really leads to is a chump block. Ross is still, again, at 18 during all of this.
Well, Kevin's going to go for the burnout here. The plan to burn him out. He's going to stoke the flames at Ross, this pumped Seeker of the Way. He has a Dig Through Time in his hand, which he has been unable to cast this game because of a lack of blue mana. So here's a swing. Kevin has a 1/1 lifelinker. It's going to block Pelucranos. He takes a net of 3, goes down to 3. And he's going to need 14 points of damage. And I don't think he can assemble that.
Last card in his hand is Dig Through Time, and I can't imagine what the sequence of cards here that allows him to get out of this is.
He needs Boros Reckoner Harvest Pyre. But we're a couple formats late for that one. Okay, I'll go one format. Boros Reckoner Spite of Mogus. There we go. We're one format closer. All right, Dig Through Time, cast from Kevin Jones. He's going to try to dig for 2 answers in these 7 cards. I'm not sure what they would be, though. He's at 3, so he's going to have to hold off all 3 of these attackers.
Yeah, with Ross at 14, 3 lethal creatures, I don't think there's any sequence of cards.
Yep, and if there was, it certainly wasn't in those 7. So Kevin is now down a game to Ross as he takes the first game.
Ross with a handwritten sign there that said, "Hi, Gina." So Gina, whoever you are, hello to you too.
All right, well, these players sideboard, we're going to go ahead and go back into the booth here. But those of you, thank you for joining us. We're here in New Jersey covering the top 4 of the Star City Games Open, asking some questions about our event next week in Grand Prix Orlando that we now know is Khans of Tarkir sealed, but we need to know more about it. Patrick, you have a question for us.
I do. This is going to require a little bit of research on your part, potentially, though you should probably know the answer to this regardless. On Friday night, SCG Live will be covering a sealed deck build between 2 of Star City Games' most well-known players and 2 of our best-known, people who appear in videos all the time on the website producing content. They do a versus video together. They'll be constructing sealed decks and giving you some insight on how they build and how the games play out. And who are those 2 people? So tweet your answer at SCG Live and hashtag SCG Premium, and one of the correct responders will be selected for 6 months of Star City Games premium content.
All right, so going back into our match, let's look at the sideboard. Originally, I thought we were going to be talking about this match from the perspective of Kevin Jones being up a game and asking what can Ross do to close the gap. Ross getting to be up a game is a pretty big boon for him here. And the card I'm looking at here to take it for him is the 4 of Nylea's Disciple in his sideboard.
A great addition for this matchup. No 2 ways about it. Ross, it's good for him to get on the board and start attacking because he doesn't really have any ways to protect himself. He doesn't have any counter spells in the game. So ultimately, he has to win the game pretty quickly to be able to win the match. So Nylea's Disciple is a body that gains life. It's about as well suited for the matchup as you could ask for.
Now, one question I wanted to ask you is how you feel about the 2 additional copies of Arbor Colossus in Ross's board. It is one of his only ways to answer Mantis Rider, and that's pretty relevant, but at the same time, a 5-mana creature doesn't seem particularly great in the matchup.
Well, there's some other cumbersome things he can take out of the deck. The one Nissa Worldwaker, I think he could safely cut, potentially. He has 2 copies of Hornet Queen. Those aren't the most efficient things, so he has less efficient cards to bring in that, you know, he already has cards in his main deck that sort of approximate Arbor Colossus, but are slightly less efficient at blocking. So I think he could squeeze him in there if he wants to.
Okay, over on Kevin Jones's sideboard, he has a very interesting sideboard, especially when you compare it to what Jay Dean was doing with the same deck. The card I've been most excited about in his sideboard is actually just a regular counterspell. It's Disdainful Stroke. This is a 2-mana spell that counters a spell that costs 4 or more. Certainly passes the test of costing less than the spell that it's countering.
But it doesn't counter everything and doesn't stunt the early development. It's tough, this matchup. Kevin has a lot of cards he could potentially go to, and I don't exactly know how he wants to address the matchup. 2 copies of Magma Spray. Well, those seem pretty good for keeping Ross off of his mana. I can see those cards coming in. Does he want to go to Anger of the Gods? Have some sort of conversion into a sweeper deck? It does not synergize very well with his own creatures, so I could see him taking it or leaving it. The additional copy of Sarkhan seems good to me as a removal spell or a flyer, and he kind of wants both things in the matchup. And the Ash Cloud Phoenix could also be good as another flyer, but doesn't really synergize that well with Anger of the Gods if he likes to bring it in. So yeah, there's a lot of different... The only card that if I was in his seat where I would be 100% certain that I would want is the 1 Sarkhan and I suppose the 2 Magma Sprays. After that, Disdainful Stroke, Ash Cloud Phoenix, Anger of the Gods all seem like maybe they're good enough, but they all come with certain opportunity costs or certain non-synergies with the rest of the deck.
If he can hit Anger of the Gods on turns 1 through 4, I think it's a pretty good card in this matchup. But you're right that once Ross gets to the point that he's making cards like Pelucranos, like Courser, like Arbor Colossus, the Anger of the Gods really isn't relevant anymore. At that point, the only thing Kevin will want will be burn spells. So Anger can help bridge the gap to these burn spells, but the question is, does he need more ways to get to his burn spells, or does he just need more burn?
It could be a play-draw swap, too, although it is awkward to be, when you're the aggro deck, bringing in your sweeper when you're on the play and cutting it while you're, it's...
No, that's exactly it. You're right.
It's all a little awkward, right? So I'm not sure exactly how he wants to approach this.
All right, update from the other side of the bracket. Mario Martinez up a game on John Goss. Mario's running the Red-Green Monsters deck. John is on Mardu mid-range.
And then that was a matchup that I thought was very solid for the green-red player. Even though the Jeskai Tempo deck and the green-red Monsters deck are both aggressive creature decks to some extent, they share a lot of similarities. I thought the Mardu mid-range deck that John's playing would be good against one and not good against the other. A lot of it just has to do with the lands. You can afford to have your lands come to play tapped against the burn decks because it's probably not going to prohibit you from using your removal spell on time because they don't start casting creatures until turn 2 or turn 3. But against a deck that's starting off with Elvish Mystics and just has a lower base, all of your comes into play tap lands are going to be a much larger cost.
Yeah, when you look at our top 8, there were 8 decks in it. 4 of them were decks that had Coursers and Sylvan Caryatids. And those are really the only decks in our top 8 that can utilize those first couple turns. The other 4 decks were all control decks, temple decks, decks that played some of the tri-lands from Khans of Tarkir.
So this is exciting stuff to sort of see how these initial, not only the decks kind of shake out, the cards people are playing, but the mana bases as well. Because it seems like it's not just about whether or not you're casting your spells on time or reliably. The mana bases come, all the different dual lands you can play, with different strengths and weaknesses for different matchups. Like Kevin's deck, for example, he's pretty good at casting his spells on time. A lot of his lands come to play untapped, but we've seen his life total become an issue because he leans so much on Battlefield Forges and Shivan Reefs that even when the game gets into the mid-game, he's often taking a point or 2 off of casting his spells. Whereas Jay Dean was on the full playset of Mystic Monasteries. She was a little slower out of the gates, but she was taking a lot less damage off of her lands.
And we're underway with game 2. Kevin starting with some of his setup. It's going to be a Temple of Triumph. Ross with a temple of his own this time. No turn 1 Elvish Mystic for him. And Kevin just sets up his mana. Hasn't had a card like Seeker of the Way yet. which may not even be that bad. It's questionable how good a card like that would be against a deck with so many ground pounders.
I would strongly consider sideboarding it out if I was Kevin. It's probably the worst card in his deck. It's either that or the card drawers, I think, are the worst cards in this matchup for him.
And Kevin, this game does have the turn 3 Mantis Rider. He plays it, and it's going to swing in for 3 to put Ross down to 17. I'll be interested to see just how much damage this card does.
Well, Ross needs to have Arbor Colossus, or I guess there's an outside chance he brought in Contestant Tactics, so that seems unlikely.
He's going to play Courser of Krufix, then play a Forest, gain a life to 18, then play Elvish Mystic. Good sequencing on Ross's side. So he continues to develop his mana base up towards 6. It's back to Kevin. Second swing of Mantis Rider puts Ross to 15. And it's boards like this where cards like Nylea's Disciple get really threatening for the Jeskai Tempo deck.
Yeah. I think Kevin may actually have all the 3 other Mantis Riders in his hand right now. I think he just might have all 4 of them.
I think he has all the Mantis Riders. He may just play Mantis Rider every turn. Well, he already swung, so I don't think he's playing another Mantis Rider this turn.
It would be weird. I mean, if he wants to now, it feels like the ship has sailed.
Okay, we're actually in pre-combat here, so Ross still at 18. A little bit of communication there. He has Lightning Strike, 3 Mantis Riders, and it looks like a Dig Through Time.
Yeah, just keep going with this.
All right, Mantis Rider. We said it was a good card in the matchup. Well, 2 of them's got to be even better. He plays the second one, puts Ross down to 12. Ross is going to need probably 2 Nylea's Disciples to race an army of Mantis Riders.
Racing all 4 is going to be hard, even if he's drawing Nylea's Disciples.
If he draws one every turn. If every time Kevin plays a Mantis Rider, Ross plays a Nylea's Disciple, I think Ross will be okay. But it's nothing short of that.
Eventually. I don't know at what point the Nylea's Disciples and the Mantis Riders converge on the YZ graph, but eventually the Nylea's Disciples start pulling ahead.
All right, well, Ross is going to start with it. All right, so well, we'll do it by experimentation. Ross starts out with the first Nylea's Disciple. He gains 6, goes back up to 19. Gained 7 that turn, 1 from a land. And there we go. Kevin, this time not going to play another Mantis Rider. He's just going to swing and undo the 6 damage there.
I think that Kevin has a Disdainful Strike in his hand, at which point he can just say go, probably Disdainful Strike whatever Ross's big payout is, use a Lightning Strike at the end of the turn, play another Mantis Rider, is likely good enough.
Well, he'll be short 1 damage, but I agree. He's going to Lightning Strike Elvish Mystic, just keeping Ross off mana.
Okay.
He does know that Ross has a Genesis Hydra in hand. As we see, Ross does have another Nylea's Disciple. So in the Disciples versus Mantis Riders war, could still go either way. Nylea's Disciple swings in, puts Kevin down to 17. First points of damage for Ross. But remember, Nylea's Disciple, because it costs 4, can be Disdainful Stroked. And maybe one of the most important cards to do so.
It's another card. I'm curious to see if it's play draw biased. Seems much better when he's on the play than when he's on the draw.
Yeah, finding a window in which to cast Disdainful Stroke is can be difficult when you're on the draw. If he has to tap out for something like Mantis Rider. And Ross, instead of going for that, he'll go for Pelucranos. Doesn't matter which 4-drop he goes for, though. It's going to get countered.
Yeah, anything gets countered in that spot.
And we're back over to Kevin. 2 Mantis Riders so far in play. He's just going to keep swinging the 2 of them. And passes back. I like how he's playing this. If he has another counter spell, he can counter another Disciple, and then next turn play the lethal Mantis Rider.
Yeah, just playing it very safe.
Part of me did want to see Mantis Rider every turn versus Nylea's Disciple every turn. But I think Kevin's playing this the right way.
Yeah.
You don't actually need more than 2 Mantis Riders. 2 of them is a fast enough clock. See land for Ross. Looks like he'll gain a life off it.
Especially when the most troublesome cards at this point for him are Nylea's Disciple or Arbor Colossus, which is
exactly.
Disdainful Stroke checks.
And Nylea's Disciple is going to get Disdainful Stroked again here. You see Kevin with that counter. He's going to go ahead and go to 14, but should have lethal here. He's going to untap. Yeah, Lightning Strike, and we're on to game 3.
So yeah, got a little lesson about Mantis Rider in the matchup. You can see why that's the card Ross is worried about.
Well, the turn 1 Mantis Rider on or the turn 3 Mantis Rider on Kevin's side ended up dealing a total of 12 damage that game.
Yeah.
So anytime you can get a 12 points of damage out of one creature, it's going to be looking pretty good for this style of deck. So as these players go to game 3, update, our other match also is going to game 3. That's John Goss and Mario Martinez playing Mardu Midrange and Green-Red Monsters. So it looked like Ross had a pretty good hand for that matchup there, I would say, regardless, right? He had Mana Accelerants, he had multiple Nylea's Disciples. Is that just a situation of Kevin having all the right cards?
Kevin's draw was pretty close to ideal for the matchup, I would say. Mantis Riders, Disdainful Strokes, and some cheap removal spells, some cheap interaction. That's the kind of draw that I would want to get, so...
Yeah.
Ross's draw was totally fine.
Yeah.
You know, he drew 2 Nylea's Disciples, he had a Mana Accelerant, he had things to do, but he's just not equipped to handle a Mantis Rider backed up by counterspells unless he already has something going on the board.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like he had too many ways to interact with what Kevin was doing. He was going for cards like Pelucranos, like Nylea's Disciple, but with the counterspells, it just didn't seem that Ross had an out to him. You know, we were looking at Kevin's hand, and I remember thinking, I don't think Ross can win from this spot.
Now, the upshot of all of this is, you know, there's no Chain the Rocks in Kevin's list. There's really not a lot that can interact with the board, with the exception of the Jeskai Charms. So if Ross is able to get something out in front on the play, you know, let's say he's able to stick Pelucranos or to stick Arbor Colossus, that doesn't even really matter if Kevin has his tools, because he doesn't have any way to really break serve against the large threats if Ross is able to sneak them into play.
Yeah, Kevin can't really remove an Arbor Colossus once it's in play.
Yeah, Jeskai Charm plus Disdainful Stroke Good on the way back is something he can do, but that's a sequence over several turns.
Yeah, it's 2 turns, it's 5 of his mana. I think if he's making plays like that, Ross is more or less okay with it, because as this game progresses, Kevin is not going to be able to contain the things that Ross is doing. He's only going to be able to slow them down.
Yeah.
And what I think Ross has got to hope for here then is that on the play, Ross can be fast enough to just get too much on the board too quickly for Kevin's deck to interact. Both these 2 games we've seen so far, Kevin's been on the play for.
Kevin really only with the 2 copies of Magma Spray as early ways to break serve. Now, if he's brought in this 2 copy of Anger of the Gods, then he may be able to clean up a big opening from Ross that doesn't involve Pelucranos or Arbor Colossus. If he's just accelerating into, you know, more mana or things like Nylea or Nylea's Disciples, then Anger of the Gods could be really powerful. But it's not going to catch all of his draws, and I'm not even 100% sure Kevin has it in his deck at this point.
Oh, and I would agree there. Maybe we'll see whether or not Kevin does have one. There is the problem, especially when on the draw, that Anger just might not be fast enough. Ross has the ability very easily to make a turn 3 Pelucranos. And you don't want to get caught, if you're Kevin, in a situation where Ross has a turn 3 Pelucranos, you have a turn 3 Anger, because Kevin can't get these large creatures off the board. He's not an actual control deck that can play Anger and then a turn later maybe Banishing Light a Pelucranos. The Pelucranos is just there to stay.
Exactly. And if he had, you know, Chain of the Rocks, Banishing Light, those kind of effects, I would be a lot more gung-ho about bringing in the Anger of the Gods, because he could kill most of Ross's creatures and then use his catch-alls to clean up whatever big things have slipped through the cracks. But because he has no way to stop Ross, if Ross gets out in front of him with something large, I think the Anger of the Gods are much more questionable.
Yeah. Now, on Ross's side, if you're on the play, are you more inclined to bring in things like extra Arbor Colossus or some of these other tap-out threats?
I don't know if it's really that play-draw bias, because I feel like his sideboard has the cards I'm really excited about, the Nylea's Disciples and the Arbor Colossuses, and then the rest of the sideboard I'm not really that intrigued by. So I don't think there's going to be much swapping done. I think Hero's Downfall, for example, yes, that can kill the Mantis Rider, but, you know, it's hard for Ross to assemble double black quickly. So I imagine that card is mostly for, I'm playing against some some big matchup where they have, you know, Elspeth or some other large finisher, or I'm fighting against other copies of Pelucranos or something like that, I don't think you can really justify bringing it in for this kind of matchup.
No, completely agree there. One card I've been really impressed with in that last game, and just kind of in general over the weekend, is the copies of Disdainful Stroke in Kevin Jones's deck. And I just wanted to get your opinion on where we see that card going forward in the format. I said before that it does pass the test that counterspells have of, does it cost less than the thing you're countering? It is a hard counter here, and I've been pretty impressed with it. For 2 mana, it feels a lot like Counterspell. Now, there is some restriction to playing a card like that. There are some, you know, for example, a mono black aggro player would be delighted to see you running a card like that. But what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a very powerful sideboard card for decks that can get ahead on the board. Because you need to be able to leave up mana to respond to your opponent's 4 mana or 5 mana play. And if you can get ahead on the board, then you can leave that mana up. But if you're just spending the 2 mana to counter something that costs 4 and not doing anything with your leftover mana or capitalizing on the tempo, it's fine, but it's not that exciting. So for a deck like Kevin's, it's about as well suited as I think the card really gets. But I don't think it's going to show up necessarily in, you know, every blue sideboard and being brought in every time someone has 4 mana cards in their deck.
Yeah. Interestingly, in our top 8, I think you could have main decked this card and had it been just fine. Now, I don't know if that's the spot where the format will stay. Certainly in week 1, playing mid-range is a very safe thing to be doing. But it is worth noting that this tournament, you could have been main decking Disdainful Strokes and gotten away with it.
Nearly everyone's going to be presenting targets. The question is, you know, can you afford to leave the mana up, and are those targets the cards you really care about in the matchup? Now, for Kevin, that's almost certainly the case because, you know, he has to worry about cards like Siege Rhino, Butcher of the Horde, potentially End Hostilities in certain matchups, Naylia's Disciple, Pelucranos. There's a lot of targets that he's specifically concerned about. So it makes sense for a number of reasons. Kevin's the type of deck that can capitalize on the tempo and leave mana up because it plays a lot of instant speed, and there's a lot of 4 mana cards that it's definitely concerned about.
All right, so update here. You see Kevin with a 7-card hand. Ross on the play is going to be down to 6. He's on a mulligan. A lot of times that doesn't seem like it's that important in this matchup. It seems like the quality of Ross's hand is much more important than the quantity of cards.
It's almost always the case when you're playing against Burn. The Burn deck can't mulligan very much because it needs all of its tools.
Right, but Burn is I would like to say, I actually really like Burn in general because it's only a couple steps off from a combo deck.
I call it Bootleg Storm. It's sort of the...
you have to have this X number of spells, but you don't have to play them in the same turn.
Exactly.
It's like if I play 6 things, you probably died.
But on the other side of the table, it is really important to mulligan aggressively because a lot of your best cards are usually superstars, and your medium cards are usually about as good as your worst cards.
Absolutely. All right, underway. Ross with a turn 2 Sylvan Caryatid. Kevin Jones with Temple into Fetch Land. No plays yet. Ross will on turn 3 play a Pharika, God of Affliction. Interesting card out of his sideboard that he's chosen to use in this matchup. And I have to say, I'm a little surprised to see it here.
It seems a little underpowered for the matchup, though it is nice that it gives him something to do that does not play into a potential Disdainful Stroke this turn. But I would imagine if he's bringing this in, it's got to be because he's identified cards in his deck that are worse, because objectively, this has not been doing very much in the matchup.
Yeah, that is true though. There are some cards in this matchup that are probably worse. Doomwake Giant, Nissa World Waker, and Hornet Queen are all things that I think would be worse than this card here.
Though I'm not sold that that's true of all the cards. I would probably rather have a Nissa, I think.
I could make it, all right, I can make that argument.
But, you know, the other card you identified, the Hornet Queen, that definitely seems cuttable here.
Yeah, because Ross also has Nissas in his sideboard, my guess is if we're seeing this, is that Ross believes this one's better than Nissa. I don't think he would have room to, you know, you'd board in extra Nissas before you'd board in this Pharika.
Right.
End step Magma Jet from Kevin. What I have to assume is him just trying to smooth out his draws here by casting an otherwise dead card.
Well, the Magma Jet, you know, you can't sit on this thing forever and wait for the Voyaging Satyr or the Elvish Mist to show up. When your opponent doesn't present something, you just kind of have to cast it. Smooth out your draw a little bit. His mana is also tight in this matchup because it's a pure race, so he just has to do things. He can't be sitting on his hands.
Yeah, Temple of Epiphany for Kevin. Magma Jet's one of those really powerful burn spells. It's almost like 2 damage draw a card in a burn deck. It's very similar to that. It's great. It's not efficient, though. You need to you don't get that much leeway as to when you can cast it.
I always thought that Magma Jet was overplayed in sort of the pups and bolts strategy, but definitely very solid in primarily burn decks.
Voyaging Satyr is the play this turn from Ross, and he's just going to go ahead and pass. A little bit of an underwhelming start for him here. He's built up to 4 devotion, and that's going to get reset. Kevin did board in Anger of the Gods, and a really nice 1-2 punch from Kevin. Not only does it get rid of both of Ross's creatures, but it exiles them, so Farika has no targets with which to make snakes.
And we questioned the Anger of the Gods against an opponent who's mulligan and has done nothing explosive, and that's as good as it's going to get on the draw.
Yeah, Kevin definitely on a more controlling game here. He has not played a creature yet. You actually saw he missed land drop number 4 twice here, which is both good for Ross and really bad because it suggests that Kevin has a ton of burn here.
Especially when he's been doing so much scrying.
Right, and a lot of scrying has been to the top, as we see an end step lightning strike there at Ross, putting him down to 15. And yeah, at the front of Kevin's hand looks to be multiple Jeskai charms.
And this is the problem. When Ross isn't doing anything proactive, he has no way to interact with this element of Kevin's game. I mean, he can just race, play Nylea's Disciple, that's it.
Nylea's Disciple would be the best card he can play, but we'll see if he can get to something like that. This turn, it's going to be Arbor Colossus. Pretty good threat for Ross. It is a 6/6. It attacks very well. Also, it brings him up to 6 green-black devotion. Whatever he plays next turn should activate Farika and threaten a swing of 11 from Ross.
And if he has Nylea's Disciple, the extra 3 green mana symbols are really significant as well.
And we'll see what Kevin wants to do here. He does have Jeskai Charm. He may have to Jeskai Charm the Arbor Colossus back to the top of Ross's deck.
Is he looking at a Disdainful Stroke in his hand right now, or is that a Dig Through Time? He has a mono blue card.
I have to think it's a Dig Through Time. If it's a Disdainful Stroke, it's surprising to me that, well, maybe it is. Okay, let's go back here. Maybe he can let this resolve. Maybe he can race an Arbor Colossus if he has enough Jeskai Charms. He probably has to counter the next thing that Ross goes for. He's going to instead end step Jeskai Charm it to the top of his deck. I guess there's an argument that if Kevin draws a 4th land, then next turn he can Disdainful Stroke the Arbor Colossus and cast a Lightning Strike.
Sure.
And that would be ideal, right? Then because he needs to be as efficient with his mana as possible. As it is, Kevin's going to tap out main phase here for a Dig Through Time, looking for his land drop, I can only assume.
Or a land and a spell.
It opens the door to Ross getting to resolve the spell of his choice, which you'd think is just going to be Arbor Colossus again.
This is a big, you know, Kevin's paying a big cost right now for this draw too. We'll see if Ross is able to capitalize on it. But even if he isn't, it feels like Ross kind of has the tempo of the game right now. Well, Kevin is reacting a little bit to what Ross is doing.
Kevin's Jeskai Charms are killing Ross's creature, not Ross's life total.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where Ross wants to be.
So yeah, Ross just immediately replayed the Arbor Colossus. Didn't even untap his lands, just put it right back into play.
Kevin did get 2 lands there with the Dig Through Time. So played land 4 on that turn, now plays land 5. It's going to be Banishing Light for the Arbor Colossus. And this is out of Kevin's sideboard as well, I believe. Or no, they're in the main and he just kept them in. An interesting strategy here, to say the least, from Kevin. I did not expect him to become a removal spell deck in this matchup, but it's serving him pretty well here in Game 3.
Yeah. Well, when you complement it with Anger of the Gods, then it's really excellent.
Yeah. Back on Ross's turn, with no Arbor Colossus, he goes for a 2nd threat. This one's Pelucranos, but Kevin, thanks to that Dig Through Time, has enough mana up to Disdainful Stroke it, and it looks like Kevin is turning a corner here.
He still needs to, Ross is still at 15. If he could stick some proactive threat here, Kevin would be in great shape. As it stands, it's still a little bit scary.
Well, that's the worry, right? If you board in a lot of kill spells in your burn style deck, then the random burn spell, say the Stoke the Flames or the Jeskai Charm that might be in Kevin's hand, doesn't look as good because your opponent will be at a higher life total. So you do need these creatures in your deck to be the repeatable sources of damage.
Exactly, and Kevin's finally found one of them.
Yeah, Sarkhan is played +1s to become a 4/4 flying indestructible and puts Ross down to 11.
The Flyers in this matchup are so good for Kevin.
Remember, Ross's only answer to these Flyers is Arbor Colossus. And we see Hero's Downfall. That came out of Ross's sideboard and takes out Sarkhan.
I would imagine these games were just a little too fast, and finding double black in time was too hard for Ross for him to bring in the Hero's Downfall. But he's done a lot of sideboarding. I mean, the Pharika, the Hero's Downfall, Arbor Colossus has come in. He's shifted his deck around quite a bit.
Both players have seemed to have wanted to play the long game when they sideboarded.
Yeah.
And I'm not certain which player that favors. Ross swings the Snake token, Kevin down to 17. Elvish Mystic on Ross's side, but still not enough devotion to turn on Pharika. It's only 4 black-green mana, and Kevin starts with the burn spells here. This is Stoke the Flames to put Ross down to 7, and it seems like Ross is running out of time. Lightning Strike to put Ross to 4. Is this going to be lethal? I think so. They believe there's a Jeskai Charm. 1, 2, 3, 1 of each color, and that's the charm. And there you have it, Kevin Jones, Jeskai Tempo in 3, moving on to the finals.
Pretty interesting that Kevin was able to get that with really not ever getting a sustained point of pressure on the table, but Ross's mulligan compounded with an excellent Anger of the Gods was just too much for Ross to overcome.
Well, that's one of the scary things, right? When you are playing against a burn opponent and he scries a bunch, gets to 3 lands, continues to scry to the top, and doesn't play land 4, a flag goes off. You're saying, okay, my window is small because he has 7 spells here, and he probably has enough spells to kill me. I need to be proactive now. Like, you can't play the defensive game anymore. You have to kill him first. But Kevin, with the clutch removal, with the Banishing Light and the Disdainful Stroke, was able to dodge that and basically take the wind out of Ross's sails and then kill him at his own leisure.
So